We don't truly fear poverty, we fear prosperity. It's a strange truth, but one that lives quietly in the background of so many lives, whispered in families, reinforced in culture, passed down like an unspoken inheritance. Today, I want to start with something simple. Write in the comments the phrase you remember most from childhood about money. Maybe it was, money doesn't buy happiness. Maybe it was, we're not rich, but we're good people. Maybe something softer like, as long as we have enough. Whatever it was, write it. Because naming it is how you begin to free yourself from it. When you write it down, you aren't just commenting on a video. You're exposing a seed that's been buried in your spirit, one that may have been shaping your relationship with abundance your entire life. Jewish wisdom teaches that to reveal something is to release it. When light touches a hidden belief, the belief begins to lose its power. I remember the first time I realized I was afraid of wealth. It wasn't envy or guilt, it was fear. Fear of what it might make me become. Fear that abundance would cost me purity, or peace, or humility. Fear that success would separate me from my people. It took me years to understand that these weren't my fears. They were inherited. My parents, and their parents before them, had been raised to believe that wealth corrupts, and humility requires struggle. So they learned to survive, not to thrive. And I learned the same. But here's the paradox. We say we want more, yet we subconsciously reject it when it comes close. We chase abundance but speak as if it's dangerous. We pray for blessing but flinch when it arrives. This contradiction isn't laziness, it's programming. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that wealth and goodness cannot coexist. In Jewish thought, that belief is a distortion of divine truth. Money is neither holy nor sinful, it's neutral, a vessel for the soul that wields it. Like fire, it can warm or destroy, and yet we hand our children the fear of touching it. We teach them caution without understanding that too much caution becomes a curse. Imagine generations whispering the same words at the dinner table, disguising scarcity as modesty, mistaking fear for faith. We didn't mean harm. We only wanted to protect them. But in doing so, we planted in their hearts the idea that abundance is dangerous and contentment requires limitation. That is the invisible inheritance of poverty thinking. And so, before we can talk about how to build prosperity, we must first understand where the fear of it came from, how an ancient misinterpretation of holiness turned light into shame and shaped the way entire generations relate to wealth. Because the fear of wealth didn't start in your family. It started much earlier, with a spiritual misunderstanding that changed the way the world viewed blessing itself. Long before the first coin was minted or the first market opened, the concept of wealth already existed in the spiritual language of the Torah. But somewhere along history's winding path, that language was mistranslated. What was once meant as blessing became mistaken for burden. In Jewish thought, wealth has never been condemned. The Torah speaks of Abraham as very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. King Solomon's wisdom and prosperity were seen as reflections of divine favor. Yet, over centuries, a subtle distortion crept in. People began to confuse holiness with hardship, faith with lack. To be poor became to be pure. To be wealthy became to be suspect. The rabbi who first taught me this called it the spiritual origin of scarcity. He said it began when humans forgot that wealth was not ownership, it was stewardship. When God blesses you, he said, He isn't rewarding you, He's entrusting you. The problem arose when the entrusted began to fear the trust itself. Instead of receiving abundance with reverence, we began to retreat from it with guilt. We stopped saying, "Thank you for what flows," and started whispering, "I don't deserve this." That one phrase, the root of unworthiness, became the soil where scarcity took root. From that moment, an invisible theology began to shape our world. Parents told children, "Money changes people." Monks renounced possessions as proof of piety. Even today, we carry echoes of that belief, thinking it noble to want less when in truth, creation itself never stops giving. The rabbi would often point to the Hebrew word for blessing, baracha. Its root, baresh, means to kneel. True blessing humbles you. It doesn't corrupt you. To kneel before abundance is not to worship wealth. It is to recognize its source. That humility, not fear, is what keeps prosperity sacred. But fear does something different. Fear closes the vessel. When you fear receiving, you stop the divine current that wants to move through you. A river that fears its own flow, the rabbi said, will become a swamp. That's the essence of the spiritual misunderstanding that infected generations, mistaking humility for contraction. Real humility says, I receive to give. False humility says, I'm not worthy to receive. One keeps the current alive, the other stops it cold. So when families teach children to distrust success, they're unknowingly echoing an ancient confusion, the idea that holiness and abundance cannot coexist. But they can. In fact, they were meant to. Because in the design of creation, every form of blessing, health, wisdom, money, is a tool for elevation. It's not meant to distance you from God, it's meant to make you a partner in divine creation. And if the fear of wealth began as a misunderstanding of holiness, then the healing must begin where the distortion took root, inside the family, where beliefs about money are first spoken, and where the next generation quietly learns what to love and what to fear. It often begins innocently, around the dinner table in the tone of a parent's sigh, in a sentence meant to protect rather than to limit. We're not like those people. Money doesn't last. Better to be content than greedy. Words meant to build character, yet quietly planting fear. Our families don't mean to teach poverty. They mean to teach safety. But the line between the two is thin, and over generations it disappears completely. What we call prudence in adults becomes hesitation in children. What we call humility becomes fear of visibility. I remember hearing my grandfather say, "We're simple people. We don't need much." At the time, it sounded noble, clean, moral. But beneath it was something deeper: exhaustion. He'd lived through years of struggle, and simplicity was not a choice. It was survival. When he said, "We don't need much," what he really meant was, "I can't risk losing again." And I grew up repeating that belief without knowing its origin. This is how scarcity travels, not through blood, but through language. Through unexamined phrases passed from one generation to the next. Jewish sages often said that the tongue is a teacher. What it repeats, it builds. So when a child hears, "Money changes people," they don't just learn about others. They learn that change itself is dangerous. Over time, this emotional inheritance hardens into habit. Children grow into adults who apologize for wanting more. They downplay their success so others won't feel small. They sabotage opportunities to remain relatable. They give with guilt, receive with discomfort, and confuse spiritual peace with financial restraint. The rabbi once told me, "Children don't inherit your wealth, they inherit your relationship with it." That struck me like lightning, because it meant that even when a parent leaves behind no debt, no riches, only words, they've still passed down a legacy. I began to notice how often conversations about money and families are wrapped in tension, secrecy, or shame. How many parents, trying to seem humble, unconsciously teach their children to distrust abundance? A mother says, "Don't expect too much." A father jokes, "People like us don't get rich." Every phrase becomes a prophecy. And what's most dangerous is not the words themselves, it's the silence that follows them. Because silence around wealth becomes a lesson too. When children never hear the language of prosperity spoken with peace, they assume money is something sacred yet forbidden, like touching fire. We thought we were teaching contentment, but we were teaching fear. We thought we were protecting innocence, but we were passing on anxiety. The rabbi used to say, "A curse that isn't questioned becomes a custom." And so the question must be asked, if fear of wealth was taught, can it be untaught? Can we reclaim the holiness of abundance without guilt or pride? To find that answer, we must return to an older truth, one buried beneath the fear, where money was never a threat, but a form of light. In Hebrew, the word for light is or. It's the first thing ever created. Let there be light. Before form, before matter, before gold or grain or breath, there was light. And in Jewish mysticism, money is seen much the same way, as condensed light. It carries potential, revealing the inner state of whoever holds it. The rabbi used to say, "Money is not evil, nor is it holy, it is obedient. It magnifies the energy of its owner. In righteous hands it becomes generosity, creation, healing. In fearful hands it becomes anxiety, greed, or guilt. It is never the source. It is the mirror. When fear enters that mirror, wealth begins to distort. Families cover their light with the cloth of caution. They call it humility, but what it really is dimming. We say, "I don't want too much," thinking it's wisdom, but in truth it's withdrawal from purpose. The light was given to shine, not to be hidden. The Talmud teaches, "Where there is blessing, there is responsibility." This isn't a warning. It's an invitation. To receive abundance is to be trusted with influence. To manage resources well is not vanity. It's partnership with God. The rabbi explained it like this. When you light a candle from another candle, the first loses nothing. That is how wealth works. When you use your light to create more light, heaven blesses you with flame that does not burn out. And yet, so many families live as if lighting another candle would extinguish their own. They teach children to be cautious with brightness, to keep their success small, so as not to attract envy or judgment. We forget that envy isn't created by light, it's created by lack of it. When everyone hides their flame, the world goes dim. I once met a woman who said, "I've always been afraid to make more, because I didn't want people to think I'd changed." The rabbi's answer was gentle. You are supposed to change. Growth is not arrogance, it's obedience to the nature of light. This reframing changes everything. Wealth, seen through this lens, is not indulgence, it's illumination. It allows good to reach farther. It gives power to intention. The danger isn't having money, it's letting fear decide what to do with it. The rabbi often pointed out that God's first command to humanity was not pray, but be fruitful. Creation itself is a call to expansion. Limiting our growth out of fear isn't humility, it's disobedience to creation. So when we tell our children to dim their desires, we're teaching them to mistrust the very spark that God placed within them. And that is how light turns to shadow, when the holy current of creation is mistaken for danger. But light, once understood, can always be uncovered. And to uncover it, we must confront the shadow that feeds on it, the psychology of scarcity itself. Scarcity doesn't begin in the wallet, it begins in the mind. It's a quiet whisper that says, "If I have more, someone else will have less." It's the tightening in your chest when an opportunity feels too good to be true. It's the small guilty voice that whispers, "Do I really deserve this?" The rabbi called this voice the shadow of the Yetzer Hara, the inner impulse that resists growth. It's not evil, he said. It's protective. It tries to keep us safe from loss, disappointment, or judgment. But in doing so, it also keeps us small. Psychology says something similar. The human brain is wired to fear change more than failure. So when wealth begins to appear, when opportunities expand, we often sabotage them before they can take root. We miss meetings, delay decisions, lose focus. Not because we're lazy, but because abundance feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. The rabbi once told the story of a man named Daniel, a craftsman who had prayed for years for his business to grow. When it finally did, he found excuses to avoid expansion. He said the workload was too heavy, that hiring help would complicate things. Within a year, he was back where he started. When the rabbi asked him why, Daniel said, "I guess I was afraid success would change me." The rabbi smiled sadly and replied, "It was supposed to." This is the paradox of scarcity. It teaches us to mistake stagnation for safety. It convinces us that stillness is peace when in truth it's decay. A pond that doesn't flow, the rabbi said, will soon stink. In Jewish wisdom, Money is often compared to shefa, divine flow, the continuous outpouring of blessing. When you block that flow through fear or guilt, you aren't being humble. You're damming a river meant to nourish others through you. You were never meant to hoard or reject, you were meant to circulate. Scarcity, then, is not the absence of resources, it's the absence of trust. Trust in your worth, in divine provision, in the idea that your growth does not take from others. It's the belief that blessing is a limited supply instead of an infinite current. Modern psychology and ancient wisdom meet here. Both agree that what you fear, you focus on, and what you focus on, you feed. The more we fear losing, the more we create loss. The more we feel guilty for receiving, the more we block reception. The rabbi would end his teachings on scarcity with one sentence: "You can't attract what you secretly despise." So long as we associate wealth with corruption, or abundance with arrogance, our hearts will reject it even as our mouths pray for it. But the cure, he said, is as old as the Torah itself. Change your definition of wealth. Stop seeing it as ownership and start seeing it as service. Because once wealth becomes service, guilt dissolves and the flow begins again. Prosperity, the rabbi said, is not possession, it's participation. He explained that when you shift your view of wealth from ownership to service, you align with the divine rhythm of giving and receiving. Jewish wisdom calls this tzedakah, a word often translated as charity, but its true meaning is deeper: justice. To give is not optional. It is balance restored. It's not about generosity from abundance. It's about making abundance possible through generosity. The rabbi would often hold a small coin between his fingers and say, "This is not yours. It passes through you." And that, he said, was the secret to dissolving guilt. When wealth is seen as a current, not a possession, it ceases to define you. You become a conduit. You receive to distribute. You gather to grow. He told the story of Miriam, a woman who once came to him ashamed of her success. Her bakery had flourished beyond her expectations, and she confessed that she felt too blessed. Too blessed? The rabbi repeated. That's like saying the sun shines too brightly. He asked her what she had done with her abundance. She told him she'd hired local youth, funded meals for widows, and taught others to bake. He smiled. "You've turned wealth into worship," he said. "Now what could be holier than that?" This is the turning point. The cure for scarcity begins here. Because guilt cannot coexist with gratitude, and gratitude cannot live where service does not flow. When money becomes your tool of contribution, fear loses its grip. You stop asking, "Why me?" and begin asking, "Through me, for whom?" In Kabbalistic thought, giving and receiving are two sides of the same spiritual act. The vessel that gives must remain open to receive, and the one that receives must remain humble enough to give. A closed hand, the rabbi said, can neither give nor be filled. That is why greed and fear are twins. They both come from the same clenched hand. The modern mind often divides spirituality and wealth, as though they cannot coexist. But in Jewish tradition, holiness exists within the world, not outside it. The sacred and the material are not enemies, they are partners. To bake bread, to build, to trade honestly, to share, these are acts of divine participation. And so, reframing wealth as service restores balance to the soul. It reminds you that abundance was never about accumulation, it was about circulation. Miriam's bakery became a parable in the rabbi's teachings. Her ovens, he would say, became altars. Her bread, her offering, her coins, her prayers. He'd pause and then add softly, "This is how you turn guilt into grace." But even when the mind accepts this truth, the heart often hesitates, because before we can live this new understanding, we must first heal the old wounds. The inherited fears passed through generations, whispering that safety lives in lack. And to break those whispers, we must go back to their origin. Our family stories, our ancestral memories, our collective survival instincts turned spiritual habits. The rabbi said, "Before you can receive new blessing, You must heal the old fear that guards your inheritance. Generational fear runs deep, hiding beneath our behaviors and words. It's not always spoken aloud. Sometimes it's carried in the silence between sentences, the pause before admitting a dream. Our ancestors, shaped by scarcity, war, exile, and loss, learned to equate safety with simplicity and survival with restraint. They didn't fear wealth because they hated it. They feared it because it once vanished overnight. Jewish families, scattered across lands and centuries, developed what the rabbi called holy caution. It was wisdom born from wounds, a survival instinct that kept them humble in public, quiet in success, and wary of envy. But over time, this caution became a cage. We forgot the pain that created it and kept only the habit it left behind, the fear of shining too brightly. The rabbi taught that to honor our ancestors is not to repeat their limitations, it's to complete their healing. He would say, "They survived so that you could thrive." To break the cycle is not betrayal, it is fulfillment. He often prescribed a ritual for students who carried this invisible inheritance. "Write down," he said, "the sentences about money that built your childhood." Maybe it's, "We can't afford that," or "People like us don't get rich," or "Money changes hearts." Write them without judgment. Then, after each phrase, add a new one. That was their truth. Mine is, abundance is safe. This act, he explained, reclaims your story from fear. You are not erasing their voices, you are evolving them. You're turning their survival into your expansion. I remember doing this exercise myself. My hand trembled as I wrote the words my grandmother once said, "Better to expect little, that way you're never disappointed." Underneath I wrote, "Better to expect blessing, that way you never stop growing." It felt small at first, almost silly. But as I read it aloud, something shifted. It was as though a door creaked open in my chest. This is how healing begins, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in quiet redefinitions. The rabbi would often conclude these sessions with a blessing. May the wounds of your ancestors become wells of wisdom. He reminded us that every fear they carried was once an act of love, an attempt to protect what they cherished. To meet that fear with gratitude is to release it without resentment. And once that fear is released, something extraordinary happens. The energy that was bound up in protection becomes available for creation. The old armor melts into light. That is when prosperity stops feeling foreign. It stops feeling like danger and begins to feel like home. But to truly anchor that feeling, the rabbi said, we must practice it, not as an idea, but as a rhythm. We must open our hands, both to give and to receive, until the current of blessing becomes as natural as breath itself. The rabbi would often lift his hands when teaching and say, "This is the law of the open hand." Then he'd spread his fingers wide, palms upward, and let the silence stretch before speaking again. You cannot receive with a closed fist. You cannot give with one either. That was his way of describing the Torah's command. You shall open your hand to your brother, to the poor, and to the needy in your land. The act of opening the hand, he said, is both literal and spiritual. It is the symbol of divine circulation, giving and receiving as one continuous motion. Fear of scarcity closes us. It tightens our shoulders, our grip, our trust. But every act of generosity, whether material, emotional, or spiritual, loosens that grip. It reintroduces movement where stagnation once lived. A generous hand, the rabbi said, is a moving river. A stingy one is a dry well. He told the story of Ezra, a man who grew up with very little. When Ezra's business finally began to prosper, he couldn't bring himself to give. He feared losing what he'd just gained. The rabbi invited him to an experiment. For 40 days, give something, anything each morning. A coin, a compliment, a minute of your time. Open your hand, he said, and see what happens. By the second week, Ezra noticed something subtle. His anxiety began to fade. The constant tension in his chest, gone. By the fourth week, he reported an unexpected surge in clients. Though he'd done nothing to seek them, the rabbi only smiled. When you give freely, he said, You signal heaven that you trust the flow, and heaven responds in kind. Jewish wisdom sees giving not as loss but as alignment. The Talmud says, "More than the benefactor gives to the poor gives to the benefactor." Why? Because in giving, the benefactor reopens the channel of blessing. Generosity, then, is not charity, it's maintenance of divine flow. The rabbi would remind us that receiving is equally sacred. To reject help, praise, or opportunity out of false modesty is to close the same channel. The humble man who cannot receive, he said, is just as closed as the greedy man who cannot give. Practicing the law of the open hand transforms your relationship with money. It teaches that holding tightly does not protect you. It isolates you from the river meant to feed you. True wealth is circulation. True safety is surrender. I began this practice myself. Each morning I would whisper, "Let my hand stay open," and offer something, sometimes words, sometimes forgiveness, sometimes a small gift. Slowly, giving stopped feeling like subtraction. It began to feel like breathing. And as I gave, more came. Never forced, never chased, only received. The rabbi called this the law of return. And he said, when you live by it long enough, fear dissolves completely. What remains is flow. But to remain in that flow, one must understand the full cycle. The rhythm that turns fear into faith, scarcity into abundance, and wealth into wisdom. The rabbi called it the prosperity cycle, a sacred rhythm woven into creation itself. All life, he said, moves in circles. Inhale and exhale, sow and reap, give and receive. The universe expands, contracts, and expands again. To resist that rhythm is to resist life itself. He explained that scarcity is not the opposite of abundance. It's the interruption of rhythm. When we fear, we hold our breath. When we doubt, we stop moving. The cure is not to demand more, but to rejoin the natural flow through awareness and gratitude. In this cycle, awareness comes first. You must see the patterns, how you speak about money, how you react to blessing, how you shrink when opportunity knocks. Awareness is the light that exposes the hidden scripts of fear. Without it, no change is possible. Then comes release. Letting go of the guilt, the inherited beliefs, the stories that no longer serve you. The rabbi would often say, to release is not to forget. It is to stop rehearsing pain. When you release the old fear, you make space for new growth. Next is service, the transformation of abundance into purpose. Here, money ceases to be an end and becomes a means of connection. The act of giving, through work, creativity, or generosity, keeps the flow alive. The rabbi described it as becoming a bridge between heaven's blessing and the world's need. From service arises abundance, not as reward, but as response. The universe reflects what you embody. As you circulate energy outward, it returns in unexpected forms, opportunities, peace, favor, clarity. And when it does, gratitude anchors it. Gratitude, he said, is the sound of alignment. This is the prosperity cycle in motion. Awareness, release, service, abundance, gratitude, awareness again. It is a living spiral, always deepening, never ending. I began to see it in my own life. When I worried, things stalled. When I gave freely, even in uncertainty, things moved. Each time I opened my hands, life opened back. Each time I hoarded, emotionally, financially, or spiritually, the current slowed. Jewish wisdom teaches that even God abides by this rhythm. The Sabbath, for example, is not rest from creation, it's part of creation. The pause completes the motion. Likewise, gratitude completes abundance. Without reflection, blessings lose their shape. The rabbi would often assign a simple challenge. For 7 days, speak differently about money. Replace fear with faith in every sentence. When you want to say, I can't, say, I'm learning how. When you want to say, I hope, say, I trust. See what happens. Those who tried it returned with quiet astonishment. Not because miracles fell from the sky, but because their energy changed. and life followed their new tone. He smiled whenever they shared these stories and said, "You see, heaven doesn't speak in currency, it speaks in movement. And in that movement lies the deepest truth of all. The purpose of prosperity isn't to make you rich, it's to make you ready. Ready for what? For the final lesson, the one that turns wealth into peace." The rabbi's final teaching was called the blessing of enough and more. It was his way of showing that true prosperity isn't measured by what fills your hands, but by what fills your heart. He began that last lesson with a quiet smile. "Enough," he said, "is not a number, it's a state of trust." In Hebrew, the word dayenu, meaning "it would have been enough," is sung during Passover as a song of gratitude. Each verse thanks God for a blessing, then declares, "And even if nothing more had come, it would have been enough." The rabbi explained that dayenu is not complacency, it's sacred satisfaction. It's saying, "Oh, I am full but still open." He taught that enough and more are not opposites, they are partners. Enough is the ground beneath your feet, more is the sky above your head. When you walk in both, rooted in gratitude, stretched in growth, you live without fear. We closed our eyes as he spoke. "You will know you are healed from scarcity," he said, "when you can hold wealth without clutching it and release it without regret." He raised his hands, palms open, the same gesture he had taught since the beginning. "This is peace," he said. "Not the peace of stillness, but of balance. The peace that comes when you no longer confuse fear with wisdom, lack with humility, or wealth with sin." I remember that night vividly. The courtyard was quiet, the air warm and fragrant with olive oil lamps. He recited the ancient blessing. "May the Lord bless you and guard you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace." He looked at us each in turn. "Share this," he said, "not as knowledge, but as light. Tell your children that wealth is not the enemy. It is a mirror. Teach them that gratitude is the lock and trust is the key. And when they hold abundance, remind them that they were never meant to fear it." His voice softened. "If you do this, the curse will break not just for you, but for generations." I left that night under a sky full of stars, feeling a stillness I hadn't known before. Not silence, but serenity. The kind that comes when fear finally loses its purpose. Now I pass the same invitation to you. For the next 7 days, speak the language of blessing. When you catch yourself saying, "I can't afford," change it to, "I'm preparing to receive." When you feel fear, whisper, "Enough and more." And as you do, watch how your world shifts, how light finds the corners that scarcity once claimed. Because in the end, Jewish wisdom doesn't teach us to chase wealth. It teaches us to trust it. May your hands stay open, your heart stay humble, and your home overflow, not only with riches, but with peace.